Well, Election Day is just 106 days away. This election year is anything but typical. Xavier University political science professor Mack Mariani is here via Skype to talk with us about it this morning. Hey, Mack, thanks so much for coming on with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Anjanette.
So a lot of polls show that Joe Biden is polling very well this election year, but I've seen maybe just one poll showing that President Trump is doing a little bit better in the last couple of days, but not by much. So what do you make of all of these polls? Is Joe Biden going to, be our next president?
Well, I think what we learned in 2016 is that we need to be a little bit cautious about it, over relying on the polls. I think that at the same time, I think that the Republicans have kind of convinced themselves that polls don't matter. And I think if you look at the polling averages rather than any individual poll, there's a pretty consistent 10-point lead for Biden. And given the fact that the president is the incumbent, generally what you see is most times the undecided vote breaks for the challenger, which in this case is Biden. So things don't look good. I mean, the last 6 months has been topsy-turvy. We've gone from a political environment where Trump was, I think, favored to win because we had 3.5% unemployment. The economy was doing well. His poll numbers, well, never great, were as good as they'd ever been. And now we're in completely the opposite territory for him, and he's certainly fighting for his political life.
And we're seeing some women appearing on the screen: Kamala Harris, Stacey Abrams, Val Demings. These are people who, and even Elizabeth Warren there, they've been discussed as possible running mates for Vice President Biden. Who do you think kind of leads that list?
Well, right now, Kamala Harris is the favorite. I think she's the favorite in the prediction market. So she was a presidential candidate, which means she's been vetted pretty carefully by the media. She also, probably the biggest detriment that she faced was coming in as a prosecutor. In the Democratic primary, that was a disadvantage because it was seen as she was a tough on crime prosecutor. But I think in this environment where we see, earlier in the newscast, you had scenes of domestic unrest in Portland, I actually think that tends to lend itself favorably towards her, because it's going to be tough to paint her as, not tough on crime and not prepared for those sort of challenges.
And it's always all about Ohio, Ohio. I don't think anybody's won the presidency without Ohio in several decades at least. So do you think it's going to be tight in Ohio, or what's your feeling on that?
I think it's really hard to know. I think, what we've seen in the last 6 months is, we've seen crisis after crisis, and who knows what 2020 is going to bring. I think that right now, if you look at where things stand, it's probably a neck and neck race here in Ohio. The president 6 months ago would have been heavily favored. Right now, it's probably a toss up. A big question is what happens over the next few months, right? And there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, about who Joe Biden's vice presidential pick will be, and I think that will loom pretty large, because I think there's a lot of people who are going to be interpreting that as somebody who might be stepping in if Joe Biden's unable to fulfill the duties for a full 4 years. There's a lot of questions about his health, obviously. The second big uncertainty here is what happens to the economy. We've seen the unemployment rate, skyrocketed to 14.5% or 15% in the wake of coronavirus, but it's dropped to about 11% now, and what happens to it over the course of the next few months may well determine, particularly in Ohio, how President Trump does.
All right, Mack Mariani, thanks so much for joining us this morning. It's always interesting to watch these things develop, and I'm sure we'll be checking in with you again.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.